Hey guys, welcome to week 3. You guys are doing great. There are still some people who are not turning in assignments, and obviously they're not going to make it. But for those of you turning in assignments, most of you are doing really well. A couple of you kind of missed the point a little bit, um, but that's okay. Hey, it is abundantly clear to the instructor who reads the chapters and who watches the lectures or reads the PowerPoints, because you're right on point. When you read those things and you provide great homework assignments, you do good papers, and you write or you prepare your step-by-step PowerPoints from your labs or whatever. You're doing a great job. Couple sticking points where I keep seeing students make mistakes is failing to provide in-text citations. So if you're going to provide technical information, it's always a good idea to quote or paraphrase an expert, and then in parentheses afterwards say Solomon 2015, and then down at the bottom on your resources page, your works cited page, there's Solomon 2015. So I can easily see, or a reader can check your sources, right? So if you want to be a credible professional author, whether you're authoring a report from a forensic report or whether you're writing a white paper, cite your resources. You're not just making stuff up, you are in fact gathering data, and you need to list that data. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. So a couple of things that I want to clarify about evidence collection really quickly here is that first of all, one of the things that most people missed was the idea that you have to have authority to seize evidence. Okay, so in most cases, you either have a consent form, right, signed by the owner of the property. In this case, if you're doing a corporate investigation, then all of the almost all of the devices and information on the network is going to be owned by the corporation, and they hired you to come do the investigation. Maybe you work for the corporation, so they're going to give you consent to do that. Never a bad idea to have a signed consent form, unless you're in-house. If you're working in-house, then that's probably implied consent. But if you're working for another corporation, you're a contractor, you come in as an incident response team, uh, get them to sign a consent form so that can't come back and get you later. If you're working for law enforcement or something like that, then you have to have a warrant, or you have to have some kind of a court order that says you have authority to take somebody else's property. All right, scene documentation. Most of you got that. Take lots of pictures. We've already discussed that. Good job. Evidence documentation, same thing. Take lots of pictures of the specific evidence that you're collecting. An area that some of you kind of glossed over or missed altogether was the idea is that there's an order that you want to collect evidence in, especially digital evidence, right? If you come upon a running computer, you might want to consider capturing the RAM. And then you might want to capture all of the network connections and any running processes and services and things of that nature. And then you probably want to do, if there's any evidence of disk encryption, you want to do a live disk capture, right? So you're going to go ahead and capture the logical files on that computer as a live acquisition. It's not as forensically sound per se as a dead box capture, but if it's the only evidence available because the system's encrypted, then it still meets the best evidence rules, right? So even though it's not 100% forensically sound because it's volatile, it's changing as you collect it. The act of collecting it changes the data. If you're documenting everything you're doing, then it'll probably stand in court as best evidence. Okay. The next best thing is to do a shutdown or to pull the plug from the back of the computer and then do a dead box acquisition, where you're just taking the hard drive out, putting it up to a write blocker and acquiring it. Most of you got that. You nailed the write blocker piece and making sure that you're not interfering or introducing additional data to the hard drive. Something that was missed by most of you was the idea of looking for mobile devices, right? Phones, tablets, things like that, and then isolating them from their network using a Faraday bag or by removing the battery or something. But phones are huge. I mean, we're thinking of hard drive forensics when in fact probably 80% of our cases are phones now, right? I mean, everyone's does everything on their phone. You're gonna have to think about mobile devices a lot. Trace evidence. Some of you mentioned this. In fact, some of you, your whole thing was on trace evidence, and so you lost some points for not really considering the implications of digital evidence. But trace evidence is my fingerprint, my DNA, something that I'm going to leave on the keyboard or a hard drive or a thumb drive or whatever. If it's really, really important to put a suspect at a crime scene, you might want to submit the keyboard or the mouse for DNA sampling or swabbing prior to you using it as digital evidence acquisition. So you got to think about that stuff. You got to think about physical trace evidence and how it responds. Now, if it's a murder scene, right, there's probably going to be a lot of concern about trace evidence. So as the digital forensics team coming in as part of the incident response team for collecting digital evidence, you're probably going to take second tier or back seat to the guys in collecting DNA and blood spatter and fingerprints and all that stuff. But even if you are the first guys on scene and they want you to go get the computer stuff first, you have to be thinking about fingerprints and DNA and stuff like that. Sorry about that. Okay, video surveillance and DVRs. A couple of you mentioned that. That was great. When you get on a crime scene or you're doing incident response, one of the best ways to put a bad guy at the computer is the surveillance camera in the office, or the surveillance camera outside the front doors that show him going in and him coming out and no one else in that time frame, right? So that always collect your DVR stuff, and that's a whole art unto itself, which if you haven't taken Professor Swanson's video forensic class at UAT, he's one of the few experts in Arizona. Well, he's one of the few experts in the United States. There's only a handful of digital DVR forensics experts, and only a few in Arizona, and he's one of them. Chain of custody documentation, right? That's kind of a key point of evidence collection, and you did a whole other paper on that, and so that's part of the evidence collection process, is maintaining a chain of custody, which basically identifies who is handling the evidence, when and where it's changing hands, right? So that there's a comprehensive list that follows this piece of evidence everywhere it goes and everybody that touches it. And then transporting the evidence, again, if you gotta isolate it from a network, it's a mobile device, it's got cellular capability or whatever. You want to put it in a Faraday bag or an aluminum can. We used to carry little aluminum paint cans for cell phones because you can't afford Faraday bags are very, very expensive, and even police departments can't necessarily afford a Faraday bag for every time they collect a mobile device because, like I said, mobile devices are at every crime scene, right? And so what you can do is you can take a piece of aluminum foil and wrap the phone in it, right? So the phone's still on, and we don't want to shut the phone off because maybe it's got a pass lock or whatever, so we disable the pass lock. That's another thing to consider, right? When you collect evidence at the scene, is you take their phone, you take a picture of the screen, you scroll to the settings, put it in airplane mode, take a picture of you putting it in airplane mode, disable screen lock, take a picture of that. So are we altering the evidence on a mobile device? Absolutely. But it's the only way we can preserve the evidence is by altering it. So as long as you document each step of what you're doing that's technically altering the evidence, it's probably going to be admissible in court and not going to get thrown out because you're being very transparent. You're documenting everything you're doing. So I'm going to put it in airplane mode, and I'm taking it off its network, and I'm going to, stop the screen lock or the screensaver or whatever from coming on. And then if I'm still concerned about potentially Wi-Fi connections or whatever in the area, I'm going to wrap it up in a sheet of aluminum foil, like 5 to 7 times, should isolate it from the network. I don't know if you knew that, but if you wrap your phone in aluminum foil, it'll kill the battery really fast because it'll be trying to ping the network and it won't be able to. So if you are wrapping evidence in aluminum foil, just remember that battery is going to go nuts trying to ping the network, and it's going to drain the battery really quickly. So wrap it in aluminum foil, put in an aluminum can, take it back to base, get it plugged in quickly so you don't kill the battery, and you can keep it on in its on state. Let's see. And then, of course, most of you got the concept of taking your digital evidence, making a forensic copy of it, using a write blocker, preventing any additional read write, etc. It's allergy season, guys. I'm dying over here with allergies. Um, and then examining and reporting on your evidence. So that's basically what we were looking for in that assignment. I hope that helps clear that up. Now, this week's discussion questions are about previewing prior to imaging and what the advantages or disadvantages of that might be. And so I wanted to talk a little bit here about FTK Imager again because it's such a great tool. And so and some of you included this in your FTK Imager tutorial, which by the way, everyone did a really great job on that. When you click the add evidence button and it says, are you going to, add a physical, logical, or an image, contents of a folder, whatever. Let's just add my physical drive here. We'll just add my operating system, my C drive. Yep, Samsung SSD. So here it is. Now I'm essentially in preview mode right now. That's what we're doing. I haven't imaged it yet, but it is effectively. Now it'd be really important to have my hard drive that I'm examining hooked up through a write blocker right now because by examining it using FTK Imager through Windows, it could actually go out and change metadata on the system when we're accessing it in preview mode. So we want to make sure that the drive that we are previewing is in fact hooked up to a write blocker because I could potentially be changing metadata of the files as we examine them here. But one of the things that you want to think about before you go in and image a 2 or a 3 or a 4 terabyte hard drive, which takes a substantial amount of time, that doesn't even include necessarily the file ingest or the processes that you're running, the indexing and the data recovery, the file carving, etc. All that stuff that a good forensic suite does for you. We're talking time, right? So if you're at a crime scene and you collect 6 2 terabyte hard drives, you may not want to image all 6 of them and process all 6 of them. At least not initially, because that's a huge chunk of time, when you've got cases stacking up in the queue and each case has terabytes of data that you have to examine. You want to be as concise as possible and maybe not even image all of those hard drives. So we'll hook them up to a write blocker, we'll open up FTK Imager, and we'll take a look at some of the stuff that's on there. Okay, so we've got 3 partitions here. Nope, just 1 partition on my NTFS. Oh no, yeah, sorry. I do have 3 partitions here. There's a 500 megabyte partition, which is probably just a system recovery, right? Partition 2 is the OS. It even says it right there. That's nice. Partition 3 is also a 500 megabyte partition, which is probably also related to recovery. So here's our OS. This is probably where my evidence is going to be. If I think that my bad guy has a hidden partition on here, right? It might be out here in unpartitioned space, but there's things we can do to look for hidden partitions, and FTK Imager is a good tool for doing a preview looking for hidden partitions. Often it'll say, yeah, there's a partition here. It looks like it's an ext file system. It doesn't parse it out very well. FTK is primarily used to parse out Windows devices, so you may or may not get all of the inodes off of an ext file system. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. That's a 105 topic. But what we're really interested in is doing a quick preview of this Windows system. And so where are some places that you're going to go to preview a Windows system? Well, typically the first place you're going to look is we're looking for what we call low-hanging fruit, which is just the easy stuff where most people are going to keep their documents or their data. So if I'm looking for identity theft, if I'm looking for stolen documents, if I'm looking for child pornography, whatever I'm looking for, whatever evidence of whatever crime, typically I'm going to go right to the users folder, right? And I'm going to look under the main user, right? And I'm going to go down, I'm going to look, what are some of the places you want to look? Well, the desktop. What's on the user's desktop? Here he's got a folder that says Ether. He's got a folder that says Forensic. Ah, very suspicious. Maintenance tools, media tools, an SD card. There's an SD card. Interesting. Okay. Tech education and UAT. Also very suspicious. So you can tell my desktop's pretty boring. Those are the folders that I have on there, and a few files on there that I would use frequently, but that's common, right? Bad guys are going to keep the files and the folders on their desktop that they're going to use most commonly, and so we could start looking through these other folders up here. Look, under the forensic folder, oh, cell phone tools, CFR 105, DD, all kinds of forensic tools right there. You can find a lot of my forensic tools right there on my desktop. The same would be said for a bad guy who is um, you know, making false IDs or forging documents or whatever. Might be right on his desktop. Okay, if it's not on his desktop, could be in his documents, right? There's Dropbox. Ooh, that's a good thing. See, another thing, when you are collecting data at a crime scene, you need to check your warrant, and your warrant should include cloud accounts related to the suspect. So if you get there and his computer's open, you can go right into his Dropbox, his Google Drive, his OneDrive, wherever, Amazon, wherever he may have cloud accounts, and download that stuff. So, of course, you have to be able to articulate to the judge why that's relevant to your case, but if you're smart, you should be able to do that. All right, so now we just did a preview of the desktop. That's where I'm going to find a lot of stuff related, and also the users folder. It just gives you a quick idea if there's anything suspicious on the bad guy's computer. Now, if he did a really good job of hiding a partition, you may not see it in a preview. If he's got, if he buried his suspicious contraband or whatever in some random Windows, maybe he went down and went to Windows System 32 or whatever, and made an obscure folder down there. You may not find it on a preview. If you're looking at a 2 terabyte drive, you can spend way too much time previewing, and then you've kind of defeated the purpose. But if you can go out there and do some quick searches and see if you can find anything, previewing would be very helpful. And then if you find something useful, then you image the drive, right? Then you go into, let's select the source and create an image file or a forensic copy of this hard drive. All right, hope that answered that question. Let's see, what did we talk about? We talked about chain of custody, we talked about evidence checklist, we talked about previewing. Excuse me. We didn't talk about dual boot systems, but that's kind of a no-brainer, that discussion question. Of course, bad guys can have dual boot systems just like you do. And so when we examine partitions, we are looking for other partitions on there that may or may not be Windows-based systems. Now, after you make an image of a hard drive, you can use something like FTK Imager, and you can, let me see if I can find it, put on my nerd specs here. Oh, look, there's a capture memory. That's a good, I used FTK Imager to capture memory quite a bit in the field. I lost it. Where is it? Mount drive is what I'm looking for. Maybe I bet I have to have a logical image or an image file open before I can mount it. Oh, there it is, image mounting. There you go. So if I've created an image, I can now mount that image just like it's a hard drive or a virtual disk, right? And then I can preview the image. It's in write block mode, but I can just use Windows Explorer to start digging around through it. And maybe see things kind of how the bad guy would have seen them. There are other utilities where you can take an image and you can make a bootable, you can bring it right into VMware and boot it as a VM. So you can actually look at the bad guy's computer as though it were on your desktop. All right, as he would have seen it, and take screenshots and all that stuff. That's all I've got for you today. I hope that was helpful. Um, I think that's it. Have a good week. Over and out.